Hello, and welcome to Fundamentals of Major Donor Fundraising. My name is Beth Upton. I am the Chief Executive CEO of Money Tree Fundraising. Why should you listen to me? I have been a fundraiser since 2002, working across all disciplines and working my way up to becoming a fundraising director before setting up Money Tree Fundraising in 2010. Included in that job history was a stint as capital campaign manager for the Marlow Theatre in Canterbury. The rebuild of the Marlow was a 25 million project, of which our fundraising target was 4 million, which came from high value sources. And today, Money Tree Fundraising specialise in high value fundraising, so trusts, major donors, and capital appeals. In 2020, I studied the psychology of philanthropy with Jen Shang at the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy, which I passed with merit. And last year, I qualified as a relational dynamics coach. You may be familiar with me from my online profile, perhaps on the Major Donor Fundraising Group, which I took over last year, or the Trust Fundraising Hub, both of which are on Facebook. And if you aren't members of those groups, I do recommend them to you, and there will be links to those at the end of this video. Let me tell you about our first major donor Kickstart client, so St Francis Hospice in Essex back in 2018. St Francis Hospice had several major donors, but no dedicated major donor programme. Resources allocated to this area were very limited, one fundraiser responsible on a part-time basis. Some prospect research had been carried out with limited follow-up. The hospice wished to develop a fully functioning and sustainable major donor programme with engagement from senior leadership, fundraising team members, and trustees. So we reviewed the projects that required funding and their visionary ambitions as an organisation, the donors, prospects, and their individual potential, the organisational commitment and resources available for this, and we drafted them a strategic case for support. This then led us to work alongside the team to deliver templates for prioritising donors, individual plans for key donors, training on major donor fundraising and asking for the fundraising team and trustee board, donor interviews to understand motivations for supporting the hospice, and obviously a full report and recommendations for setting up and developing a major donor programme. As a result of our work, the top major donor became far more engaged and offered to work more closely with the fundraising team and become more involved as a lead donor with other prospects. The case for support identified priority service areas and gave them projects to put in front of donors. The trustee board became more engaged with several people on there willing to meet and engage donor prospects. They have a better understanding of the motivations of their major donors and how they would like to be communicated with. They have a prioritised prospect list and improved systems for flagging and managing donors on their database in the future. There is a clear major donor strategy now in place. Large donations started being secured on a regular basis within a year of our work together. And then they developed a patron circle to develop mid-level and smaller major donors. Those early successes led the executive team to want to invest in major donor fundraising. And so they grew the team from one part-time member of staff to 3 staff over the next few years. Over the years we have been running, we have worked with charities of all size and from all sectors. Here's a selection of other organisations with whom we've worked to develop their major donor fundraising programme. I hope that cements my credibility. And I want to talk to you about the fundamentals. And we start with a really fundamental question. How do you define a major gift? So before I share my advice, I want to make it clear that the number you come up with now is simply that. It's the number that's right for you now. You will, you are always welcome to review and change where the major donor number sits for your organisation as your programme develops. And it is absolutely possible to decide on a specific number to answer this question. Perhaps you don't get anything over £1,000 at the moment, so the best advice is to start your major gift programme at £1,000. There's nothing wrong with that approach. I do, however, advocate a different approach, which this pyramid is trying to demonstrate. And that is that you start with working out how much time you can afford to give to a major donor programme and cut your gifts off there. So let me expand on that. If you assume a full-time major donor fundraiser has a portfolio of 80 to 100 names, you can simply divide that number by 5 if you can afford to give 1 day a week. Divide by 10 if you can afford to give half a day a week to this. A major donor programme is not defined by the size of gift or the size of portfolio. A major donor programme, I would argue, is defined by the approach that you take. And that is the approach that I'm going to share with you today. So if you can only afford to work with 16 donors, your major donor programme starts with your top 16 donors and or your top 16 prospects. Before we leap in, there's one more fundamental question that's always worth consideration. Why should your organisation be considering major donor fundraising in the first place? So between 2020 and earlier this year, there was an organisation called the Beacon Collaborative who published periodic findings that showed every quarter ongoing growth in UK philanthropy. And they interviewed lots of these philanthropists and lots of these donors and found that these generous people are thinking hard about their giving and are becoming more strategic in their philanthropy. So this chart plots each major type of fundraising by both timescale for receiving income and return on investment. Major donor fundraising is currently missing, and just take a moment and think, where do you think it sits? Are we talking quadrant 1 near trust, quadrant 2 near IG or legacies, 3 where events are, or 4 which is that unpopulated area because it's both long and low returns? Just give that a second. It's a bit of a trick question, if I'm honest. I have seen major donor programs sit in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 as well as quadrant 2. What I will say is the programs that sit in 1 are those that are often asking too quickly and are cashing out at smaller gift levels than are possible from their donor base. And programs that sit in 3 are usually event heavy and lack the other engagements or one-to-one relationship building that a classic and successful and thriving major donor program would bring. So a thriving major donor program will include cashing some gifts out early and will include events, but it also has a whole lot more besides. And so overall, it's not a quick win, but it does have a very high return when you get the mix right. No talk about fundraising would be complete without a classic donor pyramid. And this one comes courtesy of Veritas. I want you to take a look at the effort column. 50% of your effort in a major donor program needs to be with 10% of your own donor base within that program. So this pyramid is only those who are in your major donor program. And this overlays our own donor research at Money Tree Fundraising. We've taken just 50 of the donors we've interviewed over the years and laid them onto this chart. And you can see that nearly £1 million is given between these 50 people. And that on its own is a pretty compelling case for a major donor programme. And obviously, most of us know about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. There are skeptics out there, but the data does show that the top 20% of donors here gave 73% of the total in this sample. So it's not far off with quite small sample numbers. Another lovely visual, courtesy of Veritas. What is a reasonable return on investment over the lifetime of a major donor program? How soon are you going to see returns and how big are those returns? So once you've convinced your board that this is an investment worth making, how do you actually go about developing a major donor program and bringing in some big gifts? So there are some really common mistakes we see when we talk to fundraisers about major donor fundraising. We see fundraisers thinking that the time isn't right for them to launch a major donor program now, and as a consequence, their income flatlines or worse, declines as other sources are pumped dry. We see fundraisers think that major donor fundraising isn't for them and their organization, and as a result, they don't attract potentially significant donors. We see fundraisers prioritize other things above this area of fundraising. And as a result, we see fundraising, innovation, and development get parked and neglected. And my question to any of those people is, where will your organization be in 5 years without a new income stream? This is the Money Tree fundraising model for major gift development. Whether we are creating a new program from scratch or we are revamping a flagging program, all of our clients go through all 6 stages with us for trusts, for major donors, and for capital appeals. We know that all 6 of these elements and all the myriad elements that sit behind this deceptively simple model must be in place for a major donor program to grow and thrive. I want to talk you through it, and let's start with readiness. What do we mean? Readiness is internally focused and covers trustee and SMT knowledge and attitude, policies and procedures, specifically including your privacy policy, and organizational preparedness. So we're thinking business plans, strategies, that sort of thing. We are looking for a leadership culture that understands major gifts, a donor-centric culture in fundraising and beyond, sound donor processes for even the basics such as thanking and banking of gifts. Just reflect on this graphic and think to yourself, has your organisation got its ducks in a row? The biggest mistake we see at this stage is a lack of leadership, the consequence of which is that senior management do not get or support fundraising, leading to battles over investment and involvement. My top tip for starting to overcome this challenge is to ask your SMT how much more you're going to need to raise to meet the need over the coming years, and ask them where they see that money coming from. We worked once with a charity whose chair of trustees was super reluctant. He came on our training for trustees, and by the end of the course, literally turned to the staff in the room and apologised to them. He declared that he now got it and that it was the board's job to support the fundraising team in every way possible. I'm afraid our training doesn't come with any guarantees of such a change in attitude, but it does show that some of those barriers just come from a place of not knowing, and that a bit of education can be really useful and really helpful. So flowing out of the information gathering we do in the readiness stage is the proposal. You might call this your case for support. What we are looking for here is more than a brochure or an accompanying leaflet. You need to have a genuine program plan to meet a genuine need. You need to have sound and accessible financial project information. You need measurable outcomes to capture impact, to be able to report back to donors. You need stories. You also need facts and stats. Are you familiar with Simon Sinek? He has a great book I highly recommend called Start With Why. In fact, there's a link to his short TED talk that can easily be found on YouTube that's all about this. He advocates that all strong proposals start with the organization understanding why they exist. So in that TED talk, you can see the link to it on the screen. Simon uses Apple as his example. So if they undertook their marketing like most of us undertake the way we describe things, it might sound like this. What do? We make great computers. How do you do it? Well, we make them beautifully designed. We make them simple to use. We make sure they're user friendly. And why do we do that? So we can sell them. But actually, what Apple do is start with why. So their why is in everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo and believe in thinking differently. How? The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user friendly. What do? Oh, we make great computers. The why, Simon posits, is what talks directly to the decision-making centers of our brain. When it is then followed up with a good how and a good what, that then offers rationale to back up the decision that has already been made irrationally in our minds. Let me share an example of someone doing things a bit differently. One of our hospice clients needed funding for their Orange Line, which had been set up in 2016 as a volunteer-run helpline for local people of all ages who were bereaved, lonely, feeling isolated, very often with a low level of human interaction, limited family networks, limited mobility, that sort of thing. It was primarily set up for those with connections to the hospice through family members, but actually a connection with the hospice wasn't necessary to be able to use the service. The case for support for this service took the form of a long letter from one of those founding volunteers so that they didn't lose the passion, the why of those who set it up. The biggest mistake I see in proposals is that they are framed around the charity. They contain the word we more than the word you. Too much we reminds a reader that they are not part of the in-group here. They are an outsider. It also means that you are talking about yourselves, the charity, and not the difference your charity makes, which just makes your writing less powerful. It often means accidental bragging, where you write about how great we are, particularly hospices, sticking with that example, how brilliant their nurses are and how hard they work. But if that forgets that the purpose of written work in fundraising is to convey why you need money in the future, not just to tell someone what you did with it in the past. Putting it another way, we, the charity and its staff, are the storytellers and not the story. We share the story so that our donors know what difference they can make, and we facilitate them in making that difference. I run another webinar called Harnessing Persuasion, which you can also find on our website. And I talk about story selling and having the story arc in there if that's of interest for you to learn more about. But to end this session, I just want to say, please stop weeing all over your copy. Once there is a robust proposal, it's time to find some potential donors. The research begins here, but frankly, it actually never ends. One of the policies I specifically mentioned when I was talking about readiness is your privacy policy. To be successful in fundraising, your privacy policy must give you and all the fundraisers in your team the freedom to process data under legitimate interests wherever possible. To give fundraisers less freedom than this is to already make a hard job, or I should say, make an already hard job, just unnecessarily harder. The law does allow for wealth screening. It does allow for prospect research. It even allows for buying of lists. It requires charities to be transparent, upfront, and reasonable in their approach. It does not ban any of those things. Wealth screening might not be right for you, might not be right now, it might not be right ever, and that's absolutely fine. And you can flag potential major donors from within your existing database by clues they leave you with as to potential wealth. This needs covering in your privacy policy that you will be using this identifiable data. And this slide gives you some of the common flags I would be looking out for. So during your research, it is as important to disqualify potential major donors as it is to qualify them. Both approaches help you focus on the best quality leads. And remember when we went back to the pyramid at the beginning, your major donor program is based on your capacity to reach a certain number of donors. It's super important, especially if you're someone who can only afford 8 or 16 donors in your entire portfolio. It's super important that you are focusing your limited resources on your best possible leads. And here are the top things you should be looking for in both qualifying and disqualifying your potential donors. Our research into the donor base of one of our clients established 3 distinct supporter groups. There was wealth screened ex-participants in their events. There were contacts from their development board, and they had some innovative social change philanthropists on their list. We were able to design different approaches for each of those groups from the intelligence we gathered, and that led to several 6-figure gifts from existing and new supporters within each group. The biggest mistake we see at the research phase is ignoring the database in favour of new names. This makes major donor fundraising far harder and means it will take far longer to raise any money. This can risk the ongoing investment a charity is willing to make, but also ignores warm donors who become disenchanted and reduce or stop their giving rather than increase it. The best route to major donors is always through existing contacts, whether that's direct contact via your database or from peer networks. We are already on to engage. We are more than halfway through. When we work with our clients, this phase looks like donor or prospect interviews. When we run these, we can find that people are refreshingly candid as we are outsiders and strangers, and therefore there's no relationship between us and the interviewee that the interviewee risks damaging through candor. And candor is definitely what we are seeking when we do these interviews. But engagement can totally be done by you to begin with, and obviously it has to be done by you on an ongoing basis. Engagement is the essence of any genuine relationship. Another of our clients wanted to review their strategy for fundraising from individuals, identify their strengths and weaknesses so they could confidently plan ahead. We interviewed over 30 people, including staff and board members. Listening to their feedback highlighted there was no single clear understanding of the organisation's role in its community. And as there was no dedicated fundraising staff, everyone was assuming that income generation was someone else's job. The external listening ear of a consultancy provided an opportunity for reflection and to ask for clarity that didn't otherwise exist. The biggest mistake I see in donor relationships is a lack of active listening. If you are not really listening, then you don't know what your supporters actually think of you or your fundraising activities, and comms won't match the interests of those donors, and you won't be able to overcome their objections. It's really easy to be inside our own heads, rehearsing our response to what is being said, worrying about the criticism that's just been levelled at our organisation, or even just practicing the script we came prepared with and waiting for the other person to stop speaking. But to really hear what is being said means not doing any of those things. Don't have a script that you must deliver. Don't think of a clever response. And definitely don't get defensive about a criticism. Accept what has been said, roll with it, remain present. In fact, delve deeper into it. Say, that's really interesting. Can I ask you more about that? This way, you are really hearing what you are being told, and the other person knows it and, consciously or not, likes being heard. And this is what will lead you to useful conversations rather than idle chit chat. You will learn more about them in order to move towards asking for money, and they will feel involved, engaged, and important. Donors want to be involved and listened to. They want to help you find solutions, not just be asked for money. One way to engage donors, patrons, trustees, etc., is to ask them to open their address books. This way, you're building your web of potential donors at the same time as giving already identified donors something useful to do. If this is a route you go down, my tip is start small. Pick one well-connected person to start with. The worst thing you can do here is bite off more than you can chew and end up letting anyone down due to too much work. You need to stay within what I call your capacity to delight. What on earth do I mean by capacity to delight? This overflowing gutter is a great analogy. A gutter has a specific capacity for rain, and when there's too much rain, it simply will overflow and won't collect all the water that it is meant to. It is still performing within its capacity, but all we see is the bit that isn't working, the bit that's beyond its capacity, the bit it's failing at. And we all have a finite capacity for our jobs. And if we take on too much, we can't do everything well, and people notice the bits we aren't doing well more than the bits we are still keeping going with. So specifically for today, I mean your capacity to deliver excellent service to your prospective major donors. Not just average, but genuinely delightful levels of communication and engagement. So there's a well-known study from 1971 that claimed that our communication is based on 55% body language, 38% tone of voice, and 7% actual words. A study published in 2017 by the Harvard Business Review, based on two groups of people asking 10 strangers each to complete a survey, brought this study into the modern age. One group asked exclusively via email. The other group asked exclusively face-to-face. Participants in both groups assumed that their requests would be equally successful, regardless of whether they made that request in person or by email. Both groups in the study predicted a 5 out of 10 success rate. But as you can see, asking face-to-face was 34 times more successful compared to making the same ask by email. So let's meet people face-to-face as much as possible. Zoom is okay, Teams is okay, Google Meet is okay, but nothing beats face-to-face for efficacy. So now we're on to the plan. And planning capacity for yourself and your team that I've just talked about is one vital aspect of planning under this fifth element of major giving development. And the plan is essentially making sure you have a path to follow, a way of checking in to make sure you're on track and that you know you are moving forward. But plan here is one of those deceptively simple words, because what we mean is your 5-year plan, your annual plan, your team plan, your work plan, your capacity plan, your role plan, your communications plans, your individual solicitation plans, the events plan, and even your pipeline. There should be no action taken with a prospective donor without it being part of a plan. So this is a screenshot of our template individual solicitation plan. Every single prospective donor needs to have one of these. It needs to be used as the guide as to where you are heading next in your conversations with that prospective donor. And these questions, these are the heart of the purpose of donor cultivation. Here are those questions. First four, pretty self-explanatory, right? It's that little word who that's doing a lot of work because it's covering a range of who's. Now, in an ideal world, in a textbook scenario, you should know the answers to all these questions. And once you know all of these answers, you know that that's the right time to ask for a gift. I use this as a checklist to plan all my donor engagements. What do I want to learn next? How can I go about learning that? Where are the gaps in my knowledge that will further our relationship? So all of those individual plans then need to feed into an overall prospect plan or pipeline. It can be on your CRM, it can be a spreadsheet. What is important is it is both useful for you and that it is used. So one health charity we worked with brought us on board to work with them following an event at the House of Lords. The event was being put on because a lord had offered it, and rather than it being part of any plan, the powers that be had just said, "Oh, great, yes, please." The staff did realise this could be used as a springboard to launch a major donor programme, though. So often events like these become a lovely mingle with a glass of wine, the great and the good. There'll always be a speech or two talking about the charity and the difference it makes. Sometimes there's a clear ask for a gift there and then, but the follow-up is often lacking, and that is where good planning comes in. With our guidance, this client agreed internally what success would look like for them on the night, and it was contact details of those interested in having one-to-one conversations, not immediate gifts. They then considered how to achieve that and designed pledge cards that asked for a pledge of hearing more. They even thought about how big and bright the cards ought to be so they couldn't easily be slipped into a pocket or a handbag and taken home. Following the event, the home team undertook a debrief of conversations with each attendee, and the fundraising team then set about planning each individual follow-up in line with the attendees' stated wishes on the pledge card. By taking an overall look at their emerging programme, they were able to deploy senior staff, patrons, and trustees where they would have the biggest impact, saving those precious one-to-one events such as private tea with a lord for just the right potential donor. What they achieved was both high prospect engagement and high home team engagement, which I think we often overlook. They earned the trust that otherwise circumspect home team who had no previous experience of major donor fundraising and had been worried about what it meant for them. Far and away, the most common mistake I see in all aspects of fundraising is simply leaping in and cracking on with it. No plan at all, either for the fundraiser or for the fundraising team. In major donor terms, this leads to no asking or wrong asking, either of which are unlikely to lead to positive results. So my top tip is to always have a plan. It can be a light touch one, but everyone knows what to do when and what their role is. And crucially, what is success meant to look like at the end of this interaction? Following the plan means being clear where each prospect is in the process, along with how and when you plan to move them on to the next step. The purpose of cultivation, for example, as you can see, this is the longest stage in this cycle, is to prepare for asking. And you prepare for asking by knowing the answers to everything you need to know in order to ask. However, if you plan for your journey to be this straightforward, you are in for a right shock. This road is still a single road, even if it has a few switchbacks and changes in direction. It's a good analogy for how we often think our major donor programs are going to go. However, let's compare it to this complex junction, which is the donor's reality a lot of the time. Let me give you a quick example of a real donor journey for a donor to one of our clients. Financially, this person was a direct debit donor in memory of a friend and was giving £200 a month. That should be flagged on your database. You shouldn't need to weld screen someone to find that person. They also gave to one-off appeals. They also generously sponsored a friend running the London Marathon. The fundraiser had this person flagged and found out that dogs were his passion. In fact, one of his dogs is a therapy dog. This is a hospice, and so the fundraiser invited his dog and not him to be a therapy dog at the hospice. It took 2 years to get a yes to that invite because the donor was fearful of being near death and dying. The fundraiser didn't give up. And during that visit, got to know him a bit more, and as a result, started to invite him to special events. So balls, golf days. Turns out he's a really generous auction bidder as well as all the other giving he's doing. And the team observed that he's a very social person. Upon finding out more about that, it transpires he wants to find like-minded people to be social with. So they need to be philanthropic and not brash. And so the fundraising team go away and think about that. So he is invited to a giving circle of similar philanthropists who are all giving £5,000 a year. Suddenly, he's making friends. What's the next step? Well, when I wrote this case study, which was pre-pandemic, the client was considering a capital appeal, which they then decided to not go ahead with because the needs of the organisation changed because of COVID. And they were in a really deep and meaningful conversation with him about being a lead and founding donor for that appeal, which he was really interested in, something that would give him naming rights. The other thing I want you to see from this real example is the variety of giving, and reflect that back inside your organization and think carefully who would be credited, whose targets is this one donor contributing to? Because I bet your London Marathon money is different to your ball ticket money, might even be different to your auction money or might not be. And your one-off appeals and your direct debits probably aren't major gift money. So looking at it from the donor point of view, they're reaching into the organization in lots of different ways, but you need to be really good at finding out all of those ways and making sure that you can see the whole picture. I also want you to take away that real life is more spaghetti junction, not even winding country lane. And knowing the theory is important, even as I've just shown you that real donors don't work like textbook examples. Knowing the theory is what gives you the confidence to navigate the donor's real journey with confidence, so you know you're actually heading forwards and in the right direction. We're on the final phase. We're finally going to talk about some asking. I worked with one organisation who had a very keen chief executive. She held the relationship with the organisation's only major donor. It wasn't a close relationship. I don't think that was a reflection on her. They were about to launch a significant appeal, and he had been interviewed about it as part of the feasibility planning, during which interview he had said they ought to come back when their plans were a bit firmer. With planning permission having just been granted, the chief exec booked a meeting with this donor. She was not keen on planning that meeting at all, but had flippantly mentioned to the fundraisers that she was just going to ask him for £3 million at the meeting. That was half their target. Given that his previous largest recorded gift, and not to this organisation either, was 300,000, we managed to persuade her to undertake some practice in the form of a session with an actor. What this session showed was that she wasn't ready to answer any objections or to move away from her script. And it would have been a case of talking and not listening, potentially damaging the relationship and denting any potential gift level. In the end, she agreed to a softer approach and simply went, explained where they'd got to, and asked lots of open questions as part of this donor's cultivation process. Do you know what the really important thing about asking is? I'm going to give you a few seconds, maybe even write it down if you've got a pen and paper in front of you. Whatever you've written down is probably right. But what I'm thinking of is that moment directly after you've asked for a gift. That would you consider a gift of £100,000 question? What is the most important thing you can do after you've said this? Stay silent. And I should say silent and still in the real world. And I really recommend practicing this because silence feels really awkward. We are socially conditioned to fill gaps in conversations, and a few seconds can feel like an eternity. So practice. If I was on the screen and I had stayed both silent and still, you may have started to check your feed was working because it didn't feel right and maybe I'd frozen. And asks are rarely, if ever, done on a one-to-one basis. You may need to train all of your home team to embrace this silence too. There's nothing worse than you being aced at silence and someone else either fidgeting or feeling so awkward that they leap in and start speaking. And it's happened to me and it lost me a big gift. So there are several reasons why this is important, and it's well documented that silence is a very powerful tool in negotiation. What I would like to give you is that you've just asked a really important thing. There's no version of the world where asking for a six-figure sum is an insignificant amount of money for someone. They know it's a big sum of money. And so they are entitled to give their answer some thought. And they are entitled to some peace as they consider your request. You should know and follow Dr. Beth Breeze at the Centre for Philanthropy at the University of Kent. And here are a couple of quotes from her. Other academics you must follow for any fundraising is Adrian Sargent and Jen Shang at the Centre for Sustainable Philanthropy. So the single most common concern or bottleneck that people come to us with is asking. It can be an open fear of asking or not knowing how to ask. We often get asked to train trustees, volunteers, team members in asking, or even trustees, volunteers, and team members insisting that they need ask training before they start helping with major donor fundraising. Asking is vital because if you don't ask, you definitely won't get. But asking is the tip of the iceberg. It is merely the culmination of a lot of hard work that is the art and science of major donor fundraising. And the biggest mistake I see at this stage is not asking. As a consequence, prospective donors get bored of the endless coffees. The organisation looks amateurish and donors remember. One organisation we worked with was trying to revamp an out-of-date major donor programme, but of course had the same prospective donor pool. At interview, every single one of those people was nervous about getting involved again, having been let down previously. It is far harder to win back jaded ex-supporters than it is to keep existing supporters. And there aren't so many major donors out there that any of us can afford to burn through a list of them and due to a change in staff or direction or investment or effort and go on and acquire a new set. They just don't exist. As we draw to a close, I have one final tip, and it is major donor fundraising. Do it well, or perhaps don't do it. I hope you have found today's webinar useful. Before I say goodbye, I invite you to reflect on what I've shared with you today and commit to yourself an action that you will take away as a result of what we've said.